So this is the video that I know I'm gonna get shit for. Please excuse if you can hear my rabbit digging in the background. I tried to get him to stop and he's been doing it for 20 minutes. I'm going to be going over the scientific inaccuracies of xenogenders, the harm that they can do to the trans community, and essentially how I feel is the appropriate way to react to that. I would like to state right off the bat that I am not true scum. I do not give a fuck about that argument. It's semantics, it's arguing over definitions. I think it's stupid. I align myself more as an exclusionist, but I literally do not care about the true scum too cute argument. I also have no issue with non-binary people. This is exclusive to xenogenders, and I will also not be talking about neo-pronouns in this. So if you want a video on neo and noun pronouns, let me know, but I will just be ignoring any comments conflating the two subjects and assuming I have similar opinions on them, because my opinions on neopronouns and noun pronouns are much more based in personal opinion than they are in objective fact. I will be using the definition of xenogender from the LGBTQIA wiki, which is the only time I will be referencing this wiki, as it is extremely unreliable and has absolutely no sources other than which user on random sites coined certain gender names. I am only using it here because these people self-identify with this wiki often, and I think it is the only time that it should be used is when explaining what these people believe. According to the wiki, a xenogender is defined as a gender that cannot be contained by human understanding of gender, more concerned with crafting other methods of gender categorization and hierarchies such as those relating to animals, plants, or other creatures/things. I will just start with my issue of this and its relation to gender. The idea that gender is a social construct is a very misrepresented one. Gender, as it is presented, is a social construct. Gender roles are a social construct. The idea of a binary is a social construct. However, that does not mean gender is not an innate biological feature of a human. When I say biological, I mean neurology. I do not mean that sex equals gender, nor do I mean that there are only two genders. I am literally trans. What I mean is that brain sex has been proven. If you want to argue that it's a flawed, study or whatever, or that it's more nuanced than that, that's fine, but I'm going to need scientific peer-reviewed sources that discredit the studies that I will be linking in the description that are equal or more up to date, because in my 2 years of arguing this, I have not seen one study on it. Not one. The closest thing I have gotten was an article that the person clearly read the first line of from the World Health Organization, which was actually talking about discrimination and sexism against women, which just defines gender as a social construct, although it is clear it's talking about gender roles, as it later goes on to talk about how women are oppressed in workplaces and paid less, as well as the higher rates of sexual violence and such, and domestic abuse that women go through. I will also be addressing later in the video the idea that xenogenders are for neurodivergent people, usually using autism as an excuse, and as a diagnosed autistic person, I find this argument disgusting and scapegoating. We will get to this later. I am just leaving it there so that if you don't finish the video, you acknowledge that you did intentionally not watch that part of the video. I want to start with just proving my point and showing some sources that brains are gendered, that I am not just pulling this out of my ass. The first study I want to go over is an AI with the predicting people's gender identities, including trans people, based on fMRI scans. They grouped it into 4 groups, that being cis and trans women and men. They were classified with accuracies ranging from 48 to 62%, exceeding chance level at 25%. And I quote, "Our dimensional gender perspective captures 4 distinguishable brain phenotypes for gender identity, advocating for a biologically grounded reconceptualization of gender dimorphism. We hope to pave the way towards objective data-driven diagnostic markers for gender identity and transgender individuals, taking into account neurobiological and behavioral differences and integrative modeling approach." This is one tiny portion of many articles which study not only brain sexual dimorphism, but including transgender people. I often hear the argument, oh, well, these studies aren't done on trans people. They're just showing that brains are gendered. However, I have many studies linked, as well as some I am still working on reading. I just like to read my sources, unlike many of these people, that study trans people and cis people to compare them. As well as one study I have linked at the very bottom of my sources on bigender people. This study shows that bigender people have a higher brain plasticity. Now, I will note the way that this article describes bigender does seem to align more with gender fluid, being described as bigender is a recently formed subcategory of transgender, describing individuals who experience a blending or alteration of gender states. Which, to me, sounds like a little bit of a mixture of bigender and gender fluid. But regardless, I would just like to define their terms going forward. The article, in very simple terms without me trying to pronounce complex neurology words, which I did once and had to re-record, states that essentially most bigender people have experienced what they call alternating gender incongruity, essentially meaning fluctuating dysphoria, as well as experiencing social and body dysphoria, call it incongruence, dysphoria, whatever you want, they use both words in this, at a similar level and rate to binary trans people. It states that it is linked to their understanding to an unusual degree of essentially switching which side of the brain is more active, corresponding to which part of their body they are conceptualizing. It has also been noted that bigender people have a more drastically higher rate of bipolar disorder, which has been linked to hemispheric switching at a different rate than normal. It is also noted that it can trigger different hormones in bigender individuals, although they have not done conclusive research on this, it states. Essentially, too lazy didn't read, bigender people have higher rates of neuroplasticity. Now, with all of the sciencey talk out of the way, me giving you a basis essentially for brains being gendered. Again, I have way more studies in this. They will be linked below. I just don't want to subject people to me reading snippets of scientific studies. Go read them yourself. They're all open source, I believe. But with that established, as well as non-binary people being scientifically proven before anyone goes, well, what about non-binary people? Which was the whole reason I went into that section. It is safe to assume that a concept of gender that does not at all fit into the concept of gender, which I don't know how to word it better than that. Gender that is not gender is not a thing. Gender is a spectrum. Yes, I think we can all agree with that. But using autism as a parallel, autism is a spectrum. That doesn't mean every disorder is on the autism spectrum. It means that there is a variety of ways to experience this. However, those ways are not infinite and are not in some way constricted by different required criteria. There is still a definition for it, even if experiences widely vary. Being a xenogender does not share any common traits of being trans, except for if you want to say just the literal definition of identifying as a gender you weren't born as. However, they are not real genders, so I wouldn't really say that counts. Now, obviously, there's been no studies done on xenogender individuals because these are not consistent identities people use. They are things people stick with for a year, maybe 2 years, usually as a teenager or a young adult. And there is a reason that these tend to be transitional identities, either realizing you're cis and didn't understand what gender meant, or realizing that you are non-binary or binary trans and that you also did not understand what gender meant. There is no neurological way for your gender to feel soft and fluffy like a cat. It just doesn't connect. Gender is essentially a sliding scale between male and female in your brain. Whether that scale moves around, like in the last study we talked about, or stays in place as a binary trans person or maybe a gender person somewhere in the middle, it's still there. And it's not black and white. There is more nuance to it. However, there being more nuance to it doesn't mean that it still doesn't have constraints. And I'm not saying, oh, there's a male and a female brain, that's it. Again, the study shows that it is much more flexible than that. It can rotate out of different perspectives depending on how you're feeling, like how it said that focusing on different portions of your body could actually make them use different parts of their brain that it wouldn't normally do that. But there is still a constraint. Words still have meaning, and flexible or not, gender still has both a scientific and colloquial definition, which olive bread gender does not fit into. Now, I want to get into autism because I would like to note a few things. One, I am diagnosed autistic. I have been diagnosed since I was around 10 or 11 and was reassessed at 20 for insurance purposes. Two, I do not support self-diagnosis. My previous video is on that. Go watch it. Three, there have been no studies on xenogenders, nor on how neurology, at least that I could find, affects autism and gender in correlation with each other. Now, there are statistics stating that autistic people tend to have higher rates of transness. However, there have not been any studies that I am aware of anyway correlating gender being perceived differently. So until there are studies showing that autistic people cannot perceive gender in the same way as an allistic person, I don't have any interest in that argument. Being autistic does not exempt you from neurobiology. It does not exempt you from living in a world with science that explains your experiences in an objective way. It literally has no proof and is scapegoating the autistic community for being a science denier. I don't doubt that these people have experiences feeling a certain way, but these people seem unable to disconnect their emotions and their interests to the concept of gender, probably because this idea has been perpetuated so heavily that being LGBTQ is cool, that it's special, and it wins you oppression points. And now I get into where self-diagnosis comes in. I have spoken to dozens of xenogender people, only one of which was diagnosed and used xenogenders. Around 5 who were diagnosed and supported them. Now, don't get me wrong, I have met some. They obviously exist, but they are a minority of this xenogender community being diagnosed autistic or some form of neurodivergent people. And even for the people who are diagnosed, this does still not exempt you from the facts of neurobiology. If anything, I think what autism and xenogenders have to do with each other is just that they can't easily identify feelings. I mean, I know whenever I was in this essentially therapy group for autistic kids, which was great, we had a feelings chart that we would check in with because it was hard for people to identify it. And we had a bunch of different ways to go about identifying them if we couldn't just pick one off the list, because it's hard to identify your feelings whenever it's hard to identify how other people are feeling as well. So I acknowledge that it may not be intentional, but it's very often misconstruing emotions and interests with gender. Because this idea that gender is a social construct has been so falsely promoted so heavily that people just think the word doesn't have meaning anymore. And that comes at the cost of real trans people. Now, last thing I want to get into is essentially, how is this hurting anyone? / you just want cis approval. You want to be one of the good ones. I do not care what cis people think. I live in the South. I live in Texas. And I have been out as trans since I was around 14 or 15. I believe I was almost 15. I will be 22 on May 4th. So I have been out for a while. And I was out in the early 2010s. Or mid-early 2010s. I was literally outed as gay in 2011. So I know what it's like to get bullied for being trans. I know what it's like to get bullied for being gay. And I do not wish that on anyone, xenogender or not. But I'm at the point in my life where I just don't care. It doesn't affect me. I don't care unless they're making laws. If someone wants to call me a slur, fucking good for them. Unless it's a law affecting me, I really don't give a shit. I mean, if you've been on one of my live streams, you know I don't ban transphobes unless they're attacking someone in chat instead of me. Because I find them funny. It's sad. The reason I say these things is the reason that I post about my other things, like religion. Because it is belief without proof at the cost of a minority. And I think it's a similar problem to self-diagnosis, is people who don't belong in this community invading it from the inside and taking up space to where trans people who actually share experiences with each other, be it non-binary or binary trans, cannot communicate because they are so heavily diluted with people who are not trans. Just like how it was hard for me to find a community of people with BPD because there were so many people who didn't even have a disorder diluting that community. I don't care if cis people think it looks silly. I mean, I think it looks silly, but that's not why I have a problem with it. There are plenty, I'm a furry. I do things that are weird and silly, okay? But being trans isn't an aesthetic. Being trans is not an accessory. Being trans is not how you feel about your fucking aesthetic, or even people who claim their disorders are their genders. And I get these people don't, like, a cat gender person doesn't identify as a cat. They say their gender relates to cats or feels soft but feisty, or, like, I don't know. Some of them I don't understand how your gender can relate to bread, but, it is what it is. But I don't support belief without proof for anything, and that includes gender. And as a trans person, I am sick of these people pretending that they have the same experiences as me, as many of the other trans people in my life that I care about, or any of the number of thousands of trans people who also do not want them here. I also care, as an autistic person, that they are blaming my community for denying reality and invading a different community I'm in. That is honestly my biggest issue with it, is scapegoating autistic people. At least admit you don't have sources and just don't care. Fucking own up to it. If they could own up to it and stop playing victim for 5 seconds, then maybe I would take them seriously because they're owning up to not having sources. But as it stands right now, their community consists of usually adults and older teenagers who will throw buzzwords at you with no explanation, who will give you death threats, who will literally dox you on live streams, who will fucking threaten you because you are calling them out on their bullshit. For the people who identify like this, who are kids, I don't care. If you're 12 and you think you're cat gender, cool. You're gonna grow out of it in a week. But whenever it's older teenagers and adults, which it often is, I have a fucking issue because you should know better. If it's a literal child, I just don't. It's a child. Children are gonna do stupid things. It's whatever. But as soon as it's like you hit fucking 16 or 17, I'm gonna call you what you are and say that you are harming the trans community by being a fucking liar. And a science denier. Again, sources are in description and I read you some of them. I generally avoid interacting with these people because they are unable to be civil in my experience, which is why I have gone from my initial approach. If you followed me on TikTok when I started getting an internet presence, I was a lot more toned down. But as I have dealt with these people over the last 2 years, I've kind of realized that there are very few of them who you can reason with or who will give you sources. They have no sense of what a credible source is. I have been sent the Timey dating site link. I have been sent the LGBTQ wiki dozens of times. I've been sent cards written by teenagers. I have yet to be sent one scientific article. One. A single one. And I have talked with dozens of these people. And I don't know if it's because they just don't have any, which I think is very likely, or if they're just so unable to determine what a credible source is that they don't even try and go out of their way to find a good one. So, if you use xenogenders, you're not going to call me buzzwords, you're going to give me good sources, and you're going to be civil, I am totally down to have a discussion with you. But both on my main channel and my experiences on other accounts, it consists of you're transphobic, you're ableist, conversation over. I'm just going to yell at you the entire time, regardless of what position you get or how you present it. You can come at it in the most sympathetic approach. I've done that. They don't care. They think that you're just trying to be a nice transphobe. A transphobe who just wants to disguise their quote-unquote harmful positions as innocent. And if you come at it harsh, like I am now, you get called a bully, you get called a transphobe, you get called antagonistic, and you get called basically everything. And if you come at it actually being a bully, you get the same shit that you give to them and you fucking deserve it. But I have come to the conclusion that I just don't care. I'm not going to go out of my way to antagonize these people or be rude to them, but I'm also not going to censor myself for the sake of the feelings of people who I think are harming two of my communities. So if I offend you, good for you, I don't care. If I don't offend you and you want to have a discussion, even better, great. I just don't care anymore if I offend people because these people are so sensitive most of the time. I'll say not all of them are. I'm sure there's exceptions. But these tend to be the Twitter teenagers who think everything is offensive, and they're impossible to have a conversation with because you make one little slip up, and if the conversation starts going better, boom, you're a demon. Which just makes it extremely hard to have a consistent and civil conversation. So yeah, that was more of a rant with a side of science at the beginning, but I mean, I really just am very angry about this topic and how, as a trans disabled autistic person, I get called all of the buzzwords when I actually experience those things and don't use them as an accessory. So if you're using being trans as an accessory, aka a xenogender, please reflect on what you're doing to people who actually don't have a choice, who don't use a pronoun or a label because it sounds cute, who use it because without it, they feel bad. They feel like shit. They can't go out in public without wearing a binder, or maybe they can, and maybe they just get uncomfortable. Getting uncomfortable, even if it just makes you wince a little bit, is a lot more than what these people experience. So whether you're a trans person with crippling dysphoria or a trans person who just gets a little ugh when someone calls you the wrong pronouns, these people don't fucking understand. And if they do, well, congrats, they're probably trans and don't understand what gender means. Gender's not an accessory. Have a great day, guys.